Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories and welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Game Talk. A unique episode this time. This will not be a game review. We're talking about Descent Legends of the Dark. If you want a game review, please go ahead and listen to the previous episode of the One Stop Co-op Shop. All the guys are going to break it down to the studs of what is Descent, this big old beast that has landed in the last couple of months. What I wanted to do here was I wanted to take a high-level view. And from my previous interview about Earthborn Rangers, I got to know this man who is involved in that project and is involved in the high level of Descent. A director level, focusing on tabletop and digital. It is a digital integrated board game, so we are going to get the whole 13,000 foot view from this man. Very busy, but not as busy as before. But because things have calmed down. But he has been gracious enough to give us some time. Turn on the mood lights, so he looks really fly back there. But that is enough dithering. It is Andrew Fischer. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about it.
Right? Have you done a lot of press? I don't even know. Is this a thing that one does a ton of press for?
FFG has been doing a ton of press.
FFG as a company.
I am no longer with FFG. Obviously, I'm still out there talking about Descent, and I'm really excited about the project because I was involved through a lot of its development. But I haven't done quite as much. I talked about it on Twitter, but I haven't been doing the press circuit. FFG's got a marketing department, and Kara and Nathan have been talking about it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to one of those Twitter threads. Which is one of the reasons why I wanted to get in touch with you. This conversation is going to happen in a couple of stages. There's such a big game, and because of COVID land, it's one of the only games, unfortunately, of that big thing, and that may play into towards the end of the conversation what's going on in the ecosystem and everything. But it's such a big game. It's such a polarizing game. So much issues in the board gaming community kind of got wrapped up in one in terms of this Descent thing. So I was so happy to be able to get somebody who has a very high level view. So you're no longer FFG, but you are still designer extraordinaire. Developer extraordinaire, you still steeped in the industry. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Cool. So let's just get right into it. And I'm going to begin with the beginning. So Descent second edition came out. I think I was still kind of new in the hobby, maybe 2015, 2016. So around there, it was a little bit earlier.
I think it was a little earlier than that. I should really have a window up with that. But yeah.
It's
somewhere 2015, 14, 15, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll probably flash it on the screen. Post.
So you can see how wrong we are.
Yeah, exactly. It was 2011.
I don't think it was that early.
It wasn't super long ago. People who have been in the hobby remember Descent second edition. They remember Descent first edition. So Descent third edition, quote unquote, has been in the rumor mill for a long time. Right. And every time FFG, because it's always a big thing at Gen Con, right? FFG, what are they getting announced? This is the year. It's that third edition. So then we finally get the announcement, and it's a little bit wonky because it's this announcement of a big box game, but it's not called Descent third edition. So just start there. Start with kind of the mind space towards how that came about. We're going to make a new edition or a new iteration of that Descent system, but we're going to kind of take it in a slightly different direction. I don't know if you were part of those conversations, but tell us what you know about that initial, launch.
Yeah, I was part of some of these, at the end of the day, a lot of this is FFG's issue to speak to, right? So I do leave it to them how, they decide to position that. But I can say that, I think anybody who plays it, anybody who checks it out can see that it is a different beast than Descent second and even Descent first, right? It takes the game and it takes the IP in a slightly different direction. It's still dungeon crawling, right? But it's very character driven, around 6 specific characters. It is full co-op. It is fully app integrated. And now Road to Legend for those of you not familiar, is the app that we released for Descent second to allow you to play Descent second fully co-op. So it is similar to that experience, but I think a lot of people who play it will understand why it's a Descent branded experience. It's maybe not exactly what you'd imagine from Descent third edition. And so it's kind of carrying on that legacy, but it is a different beast.
Okay. So that felt right from the beginning, that felt a little bit off, right? Because big box of adventure minis, first edition, big box of adventure minis, second edition, big box of it, third edition. And so, like, as was like, no, it's different. And it felt just from the very beginning, just from the very announcement that, it's almost like, the company was telling us what this was. And, we don't like that. Like, if we see something, we want to be able to say, this is the third, we've been talking about this for years. Why isn't this? So, I mean, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but on my end, kind of looking at the reaction, that like, just from the very beginning, this was like, oh, what's this? I mean, how is this not a third edition? It's a big box full of minis. Why am I being told something different? I feel like I'm being gaslit a little bit. Do you understand that reaction?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think you're wrong, as evidenced by the reaction, right? There was some confusion. Also, FFG, we drip fed out information on it, right? Like, just started with a box tease and then just like, right. A very short trailer, right?
Right. Box tease, third edition, the trailer, third edition. What?
Well, yeah, and, and people naturally assumed a third edition, right? Because of the similarities. So like there was confusion in kind of that lead up to it. And it's something I think that we worked really hard to try to kind of rectify. And I think that the marketing department has done a good job kind of positioning it. But it did take some time to kind of like work through that. And I do think you're right that like there was a lot of confusion about what exactly is this thing and why is it different?
Right. And I mean, so what would a third edition, and I know that we're postulating a little bit, and I know you're no longer at FFG, but I guess like, what would a third edition look like? If it's not this.
I mean, I can't say specifically, like,
right. But like just in general, like, well, like, if we eventually got, because we might get this in 3E at some point, I'm looking at the Arkham Horror line, right? So like you have Arkham Horror, first edition, second edition, and then it took like a half left turn with Eldritch. So like they called it something different, Eldritch, even though it kind of is an Arkham Horror game, and then they released Arkham Horror 3E. So it's like, I don't know, like, I guess maybe this is just nomenclature, but I'm just kind of like laying out the fan reaction of like, okay, and so like, what would a third edition like do differently than a Descent Legends of the Dark? What would if Andrew Fischer was still at FFG and could like mold the world into what he wanted to?
Well, I mean, like to slightly dodge the question with a slightly different question is like, what is a third edition, right? Honestly, like what FFG positions as new editions of the game, a lot of other studios would position as whole other different games, right? Like there are games that are on like their third, fourth, fifth editions, and like really we're just talking minor updates, errata changes folded in, maybe a graphic design like update. I think Gloomhaven is technically second edition of Gloomhaven, right? Like because the first edition was that first Kickstarter, and Isaac worked in a lot of changes and and enhancements for that second big Kickstarter, and so I think technically that's the second edition of Gloomhaven. So when you're looking at how FFG handles editions, like a lot of these editions are almost whole new games that like get a lot of the spirit, but aren't exactly the same.
And share the branding. So, like I mean, the branding is a part of this.
It's branding. Right. And like, Descent, Legends of the Dark still has the Descent branding, right? But it's not taking that third edition because it's such a different game. So it kind of dodged the question, but like, what would a third edition look like? Maybe it'd have one versus many. I'm not sure, right? And that's going to, in the end, be up to the team over at FFG to kind of decide if and how they did that.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, again, parsing out like things that have been, fan reaction, letting people process some of this stuff, and so that we can, talk about what's actually on the table, right? But before we get there, so also at the beginning, the decision was made, and I'm sure you were not part of the decision, but you're kind of like implementing this decision to make this deluxe, to like blow this thing out, right? Descent was never, I mean, it wasn't like cheapo, like we're not talking about standees or anything like that, but it was never really like, comparable to like a Warhammer or like, with the nicest minis and all the, everything. It was like, okay, I got some, puzzle piece tiles, and I got some minis that look decent. And I think the original box was like, I don't know, $80-$90 or something like that. So like, it wasn't like completely out of the range.
I mean, at the time though, for Descent first edition, $80-$90. I remember sitting in the game store and pooling money with friends to buy first edition Descent, right? It was a pricey item at the time, right? We've obviously blown way past that, but it was pricey.
Right. Yeah. Okay. It's not like this. It was never for the people. So it's not like we took a thing that was for the peoples and went up. It just, so like, I guess solidly in the middle, like if we talked about it like in a middle class, like it wasn't like a $60 game, but it also wasn't like a Pandemic, no, like a Warhammer with a really like a Games Workshop game, like it's so funny. I put
Minis games are a whole other spectrum.
It's a whole nother thing. So it's like, I don't know if you saw the video. I did a video about Descent, but the price, like, the price is pretty high. And then I had a lot of Warhammer people, Games Workshop people going, you got to be kidding me. What are you complaining about?
I don't want to tell you how many, I don't want to count up how many Tyranids I have. Like it's, I don't think any of us want me to count up how much money I've spent on Warhammer.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of people out there that could say that. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so I guess I mean relatively it'd be like a middle class thing. And I know people didn't buy Descent for painting minis. That the minis were like secondary to the adventure, right? And then it kind of went there. The decision was to make third edition Descent like this just premium luxury top of the board gaming line product, right? I don't know if it was 175 at the beginning. I think it was a price a little bit lower, and then manufacturing kind of played into that. We can talk about that soon, but there was definitely a decision made to make this like super deluxe. The nicer minis, the cardboard, right? The multi-layered cardboard, all that kind of thing. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about how some of the internal discussion, and was there any push-pull? Was it like, okay, cool, should we do it a little bit differently? Like talk about a little bit about what went into that, deciding to make it like this.
There's a lot of push and pull with that kind of stuff, right? There's a ton of people involved in making these decisions, right? All the way from Asmodee to FFG leadership to our producers trying to like crunch the numbers on what we can afford, right? But like from a broad like visioning standpoint, one of the goals of Descent, like, when we're making a product, we try to look at what the strengths of like our team and our studio is, right? And like one of our strengths, to be honest, is like a production team unlike any other, right? Like one of the beautiful things about like Asmodee North America and all of these talented people coming together is we have like access to resources that a lot of other studios don't have access to, and we have access to a lot of expertise that other studios don't have access to. And so that enables us to bring a quality and like a premiumness to some of these products that a lot of other people can't. And so it was kind of an opportunity we saw to kind of bring this spectacular experience to Descent, right? And like, admittedly at the time, like, like you said, and we can talk a bit more about price, but like, obviously we didn't set out necessarily to like, oh, we're going to make a game at this SRP, right? But we did set out to make a very premium game because like there is a segment of the market. There are people out there who want a really premium experience, want to like, like there is kind of that toy factor and that wow factor of like, you see Descent on the table. It is awesome. I love setting up that game. We would just set up like, we had just prototype components. We'd set up all these different dungeons and stuff. It is fun, right? Yeah. And that's what we're going for. We were trying to capture that fun and that appeal. And admittedly, it's not going to be for everyone, but the people who it's for are going to love it. And so like that was kind of our goal initially, was we knew we could leverage that strength, and we knew there was a market for people who wanted this more premium, engaging experience.
So I'm hearing a couple of things, right? I mean, Fantasy Flight, the company, has evolved, right? I mean, the type of company it was when it was making first edition is not the type of company it is now, or when Descent was first. Lots more resources, lots more talent in the room. So it's like, okay, like let's leverage this, to make a bigger product as we can. And also, the market has evolved, and more people are just clamoring for this stuff. I mean, it's not a secret. Like you see the people that are pledging all in Kickstarter. It's like, oh wow, that's a lot of people there. Holy moly! And it's like there's a market there, and like we can service that market with the best that we can do. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and like those you talk about those all those Kickstarters is like a lot of them will have like a lower initial pledge value, but like you look at like average pledge level or like median pledge level, like they're pushing that number if not higher.
Yeah.
And so like yeah, people are willing to, and like it's a matter of how it's parceled out. And like one of the things FFG like probably would have done years ago is maybe take this same content and bundle it in a bunch of different blisters, right? And sell it at this markup, right? Like you look at some of those products that are divided into a bunch of different blisters, you add up the total cost you're paying, it's way more exorbitant because you're paying for all of that separate shipping, distribution, and packaging. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's a lot less consumer friendly, a lot less friendly for the environment because we're wasting all this packaging, and it's a lot less friendly for retailers who have to somehow stock all of these annoying blisters all over their shelves, right? And like keep when they sell blister 3 out of 5, like reorder it and everything. Selling a singular product with all of that bundled together is more friendly for the consumer at the end of the day, and for the retailer who just has to stock one item.
Yeah, I think some people are going to have a little bit of issue with like 175. Who's that friendly for?
Well, yeah,
it's all relative, right? It's all relative. Okay. So I mean, I guess like, so I mean, I'll be perfectly transparent. I think this has an effect, right? I mean, I don't want to go after a single game. And I think that, when I made the video, it was just an example, right? It wasn't like I wanted to go after, the particular games that I mentioned. It's just, there is a trend in the industry, and I think it's almost like a gentrifying effect where it's like, we're getting a lot of these premium things and, relative. And, that just if you feed a high-end market, then that's kind of like just has that effect of, kind of raising prices across the board. So, I mean, I don't know if that's an internal conversation at FFG or anything like that, or if it's just a different track of conversation.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely something we're conscious of, right? Like, and FFG has one nice thing about a studio like FFG is they have a ton of different products kind of going, right? So we have games that are able to sell at this more accessible price point to people, and like we have that luxury, whereas like a lot of smaller studios might not have the luxury to have stuff in that lower price point and the larger price point. FFG tries to kind of distribute that across like so that there's kind of games for everyone,
right?
But like not every game can be for everyone, and so like and so that's some of the decision. And like we were talking about earlier, Descent First Edition was very expensive in the marketplace when it first came out. So was Twilight Imperium, right? Like honestly, like when you talk about like that kind of like raising the bar of what is an acceptable price point, FFG has played a part probably more than once before, right? And like yes, this is kind of like a fairly high watermark, but like we've seen the likes of Cthulhu Wars, and honestly, like the SRP on the likes of Gloomhaven and Frosthaven aren't that far behind us.
Yeah, I mean, War of the Ring was I think like multiple hundreds of dollars. When like we've always had deluxe, we've always had. I guess, but I mean, I'll leave the video as the video. It's just like I think it's playing out a little bit differently nowadays. Anyway, so do you remember what the SRP originally was? Like, what was it thought of, and then things kind of happened afterwards?
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to exactly what the original SRP was planned to be, but it did like the realities of a lot of changing things in the last couple of years did result in where it got set.
Did that play a role? So as the final development stages were happening, the change in the world were happening too. Like, and people could read the tea leaves and say, okay, we're, materials are going to get a little bit more scarce. Shipping is going to get a little bit more of a pain in the butt. So is there a moment where it's like, okay, we're on this track of making this deluxe game, but prices are going to like super high and our SRP is going to go up. Is there a conversation that happens in the dev team that says, okay, do we need to go in a different direction with some materials? Do we need to, change this or do this in order to adjust the price? Or is it like, we're just going to make the game and then charge whatever we got to charge? Like what is the approach there?
Well, so like when a game's originally concepted, we budget out a speculative budget at that point, right? And then we kind of rebudget throughout the process to kind of make sure that it's still something that's going to be is not going to lose the company money. Right. And we're going to be able to sell at a given SRP, right? And we kind of test that throughout. The challenge is when costs of goods start rising during development. And Descent had a couple challenges. So like, obviously we didn't see coronavirus coming, like, but like, honestly, this has been a problem before that. I don't know if you're familiar with, I think it's called Operation National Sword or
No. Wow.
This was, I think it's 2016, Chinese recycling law.
Yeah,
so,
that I know,
So China used to import all sorts of garbage from the rest of the world to recycle, to create materials. And after a series of events, it's actually kind of interesting. It all kind of hinges around this documentary that got made in China and like got a lot of attention, specifically this shot of like this little girl like in the middle of like this garbage field holding this bottle, and it kind of became this iconic moment. So anyway, they
like, we're taking the world's garbage. What are we doing? Type thing.
Yeah, like like we are the world's garbage heap, right? And so it like really garnered public attention, and so they stopped importing a lot of this garbage, right? The end result was that this is a while ago, but like the end result was that recycled materials started going way up and it started becoming a lot more scarce, because and this led to all sorts of recycling problems here in the U.S. that are really interesting to research.
This is fascinating, people. It is so what
I'm getting
happens,
a little in the weeds, but
well, I mean, it affects us because like we want sustainability. We want, we have a bunch of cardboard. So like everybody here has cardboard. We got to figure out what it is. And it's like, okay, we want our cardboard recycled, but like China was the recycling capital of the world. And it for many, many reasons, for the movie, for how, I think there was a whole thing about like, a lot of the stuff wasn't that they were importing what couldn't be recycled anyway, because it was like, it was so impure. They weren't doing a good job of it. So like the Chinese were like, what are we doing? And like, there was so many like recycle companies and cardboard companies and glass bottlers that were just stuck with all this stuff now. And what do we do with it? And, so like there was a whole big kind of rumble, like away under the surface, things that people don't have no idea. But it has an effect. It had an effect on you guys.
Yeah, I mean, well, it has an effect on the U.S. right now, where like a bunch of stuff that you think you're recycling isn't actually going anywhere.
Most of it's going to the dumb people. Sorry.
But back to games, the end result back then was that materials got way more expensive. And so we saw this kind of inflating cost. And so we saw this like curve going up, right? And so it was something we tried to predict for, like our producers, as they did budgets, would factor in a certain amount of climb, especially on plastic costs were going up a lot. And Descent uses a harder plastic than we've ever used in a board game before, which, also complicated matters. But we didn't see coronavirus coming, obviously. And so we have these already inflating costs along with increased cost of materials and freight and everything else caused by the pandemic. And earlier on in the game, when you have these kind of things, you're trying to predict for these kind of things, you can make more fundamental changes. You can really cut scope and everything. Later on, you get like more and more committed to what the game is and what the experience you're offering is. And so when these kind of changes, when really dramatic changes happen really late in the game, there's not a lot of choice in the matter, right? To not like lose money. And so like, I can tell you that there were some, I think everybody can figure out, there were some dramatic changes to costs of things very late in the production cycle of this game that added, complications to all of this.
It was shocking. I think because we get the word that like, okay, it's going to come out this, and people don't really know until the price actually happened. It was like, oh, $175, what am I paying for? So I think, my instinct, I don't apologize for this. My instinct is like, I'm a populist, I'm for the peoples. And it's like, I get that little, like, suspicion whenever something like big happens, but then you go into the weeds and it's like, there's so many things, like the decision to service a certain market and, all the rising costs of manufacturing. And there's so many things that come in there. And also, this is a huge team, like it has to get paid somehow. So, this thing has to make money. So it's like, it's not like, as much as I would want to imagine as a populist, like, Asmodee and the hedge fund kind of like, steepling their fingers and going, how much can we soak these people for? It's not quite that easy to think about, is it?
No, and like you have to also keep in mind that it's a huge team, right? Like there are a lot of people with a lot of varying opinions, right? And like this is a published game with a lot like riding on it, right? So like a lot of there's a lot of people who worked really hard on this game who share these exact same concerns, right? They want their work to be as accessible as possible, want it to be as available and affordable to people as possible. But at the end of the day, there are other considerations, and it's a large organization that needs to make a product that doesn't lose money.
Right. And that's, I mean, is that really, was it close to that? I think at the end of the day, is you say $175 MRP and you get that sticker shock and you get that, like, how much money and how much money are they making? Like, is it the case where, like, if certain things go wrong, like the margin is actually a lot thinner on that than you would think? Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think people would be shocked at how thin the margins on a lot of board games are.
Even these games. And I know people think like, $40 something is going to have a thin margin, but like even $175 game like this is going to have a thin margin. Is that like a fair statement to say?
Yeah, and a lot of big Kickstarters actually lose the creators' monies at the end of the day. And it's even more complicated by the fact that so like I kind of alluded this into the Twitter thread that had you messaging me, but so there's a difference between selling through like distribution networks and selling direct, like or via Kickstarter, right? So like
pre-order on the web store would be direct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Pre-order on web store would be direct. You put in the order, like we, the game studio, just ship you the game. We keep almost all the money except for processing fees and shipping and stuff. Or like Kickstarter, Kickstarter takes a fee, but otherwise all the money goes to the creator. So like, Earthborn Rangers, the games I've been working on, like, we're selling direct to people through Kickstarter and then through our website. Right. But a game like Descent is distributed. And so that means that the company sells to a distributor. That distributor then contacts FLGS's, friendly local gaming stores, and sells to them. Both times there is a discount. Right. So, I can't speak to exact numbers, but the discount given to distributors is significant.
Oh, we had a person on the previous episode to this one we're going to break down the cost of the distributor and the wholesaler and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So,
this is like a companion piece to that the previous one.
Yeah, you can go listen to that episode. So it is significant, that the cost that is going there. But the benefit is that some of the money is then going to these local gaming stores, which support. I mean, obviously during coronavirus, not that useful to all of us, but assuming we can get everybody vaccinated and like actually see the world again, we're going to be really glad to have them because they're this great source of community. And like are really valuable to the hobby. And so, and then by extension, distributors really valuable to them because like game store owners don't want to have to order every single game.
Right. It's a one-stop shop to order a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Like otherwise you have to employ like a full-time person, maybe more, to constantly keep up with the industry and order all your games. So a game like Descent is going to be distributed. All of FFG's games are going to be distributed. Whereas a game like Earthborn Rangers, the other game I'm working on, we get to sell direct, which means that we can kind of change the math on how we're spending money and like afford different things, right? And so like that factors big into the cost. Like a lot of these big Kickstarter games that are selling and are this point of price comparison are selling direct and can afford to spend a bit more or shave the SRP a little bit. If Descent were like only distributing during Kickstarter, its SRP would not be as high as it is.
Right.
But that's supporting these other parts of the chain and these other parts of the industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I mean, that's how we got to at least what it is like in terms of like that deluxe vision, right? I mean, there's so much that goes into deluxe vision. And so here we go, right? I mean, so the word is out. The FF the team that you're directing has your specs. Right. And now go design this thing. Okay. So then a couple of things went into the design. So like the 3D terrain, right? Talk a little bit about the decision to go that particular route because that one's gotten mixed reviews, right? Because whenever you do 3D terrain in a board game, it causes some difficulty at the table, right? So it's like I'm trying to reach below something, and it's kind of a physical, kinetic difficulty for some folks. Some people love putting it together, some people hate putting it together. Like,
well, we did test assemblies where we would like just give the punch board to a random employee and be like, try to assemble this without guidelines at all, and like the well went through. Oh, there was an iteration of the well that was all circular. And like Adam Baker, our technical editor, I'm pretty sure wanted to throw that thing across a room as he tried to assemble it. So we got redesigned. Anyway, the 3D terrain actually came about earlier in development. Nathan Hajek was working on the initial design of the game. And at that point, it had kind of the more like modular tiles that weren't as like painted art, were instead textured, and so you can kind of assemble things. But we were kind of doing like an overlay type system at the time. And actually, one of the graphic designers from the graphic design department came with some what started as just like it was going to be like a table or something, and he put little legs on the table, and he came with some of this 3D terrain. And like we started kind of looking at this, and it added this whole other kind of layer of visual flair to the game and ability to kind of see what was going on. Like I love Descent Second Edition, but like some things can get lost on those tiles. You're like, wait, what color was that outline, right? Like, oh, that was a dashed purple outline. Oh crap, I couldn't have done that, right? Like there was no ambiguity here. You could see everything, and it was very cool. And the kind of verticality of the map spawned from that, because we were kind of looking for, now that we're doing this, and what it enabled us to do, it enabled us to create some like more, well, players expected more kind of verisimilitude to the representation on the table now, right? Because their other terrain is 3D. So oh, this is raised up. They're like, well, why isn't it raised up? And so.
Okay. So like if you raise the table, why didn't I raise the bookshelf? Or like there's all sorts of other things like stairs.
We're like, this is a balcony overlooking this courtyard, and they're like, well, it doesn't look like a balcony, right? And and then it enabled us.
It looks like a bench. Why raise the thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it enabled us to communicate that verticality in a way we never could, and so it kind of like it was kind of this stepping stone as we saw the benefits of this, and kind of like, well, like mechanically, there's one cool map that I won't spoil that really uses it to a cool effect kind of midway through the game. I think Kara designed that one, and it's awesome. But there's a couple like parts where it might pass over like on a bridge, or like there might be a little overlay, but for the rest of it, most of it technically could be flattened down, but like the understandability of the players goes away of like what they're looking at. And so like the gain might not necessarily be strictly mechanical, but there is a gain in like what we saw from player kind of comprehension of what they're looking at.
In a weird way, like I know the price like takes it above what a lot of players can access, but having that 3D terrain, like if you somehow get into the game, more players will play it. More players will understand it. More players will like, you don't have to explain dotted line, circle, wavy line. You don't have to explain that. Like it's all there. So it's like you've made like, it's a shame that it has to come in that deluxe package, but the benefits of it are still, if you buy this game and you're playing it with your children, they can just walk in and play. Like it's much easier. Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's different forms of accessibility, right? Like there is accessibility from like that financial standpoint, which, I think nobody's of the impression like that this game does a great job at. Right.
Right.
But there's accessibility from like a learning standpoint, from an appeal standpoint. There's accessibility from like a representational standpoint of who you see in the game. Right. There's all sorts of other forms. Right. And so like, sometimes you lose on one, and we might lost on the financial one a bit, but I do think we did well on some of the other forms.
Yeah. So I mean, when you hear like people are having a hard time kind of putting it together, or you're having a hard time like, okay, well, this is, they just did that to goose the cost or whatever it is. I mean, do you just kind of like filter that out in the general mental, like, okay, people complaining and it's the internet, or is it like, we could have done something better there?
Oh, you always try to absorb that, right? Like, and honestly, like, I think one of the challenges that a lot of people struggle with is like how to, this is a classic, creative dilemma, right? How do you filter waves of feedback, all this feedback. How do you filter out the comments? Like, how do you get the gold out of the chat, with the weed out of the chaff?
The weed out of the chaff,
here,
yeah.
But yeah.
How do you pan the gold from the dirt?
Because it can be really hard to read, like the internet's not known for being super kind a lot of the time.
Or brevity.
And so it can be really hard, right? And so like it's a learned skill to learn how to like be able to go out there, read feedback, potentially engage with the community, and like take away, just to figure out what feedback is valuable and what is not valuable feedback, and distill that and learn from it. But I can guarantee you, like, everybody at FFG is reading the comments, to some degree or another.
Hi,
right?
FFG, if you're listening to this, how you doing?
Yeah,
sorry, I blew you guys up in the last video.
Oh, I mean,
if anybody else from FFG wants to come on the show and talk about some of this stuff, please come on in. My door is wide open. It's great.
I mean, people blow up various games for various reasons, and so like you try to learn from it, right? And like I said, like, it's a big team. Not everybody agrees, right? There are definitely members of the team who probably definitely listen to these like complaints and like feel them 110% with all of the consumers, right? Like it's it's a large team with a lot of different opinions. Okay.
All right, so that was 3D terrain. For the most part, in terms of the accessibility, the pop, it accomplished a lot of what he wanted to accomplish. That there.
Yeah, okay. I think so. I think like we're very happy with it.
Great. Okay, so a couple more aspects. The art. Lots of comments about the art. Different direction, right? Different direction. I mean, talk a little bit, but I mean, okay, so you talked about how this was a little bit of a turn in terms of like the first edition, second edition. I mean, the art seemed to signal that this was a different game, just visually, the characters and the style and that kind of stuff. Was that intentional? Or what was the mindset in terms of taking the art in the direction in which you did?
Yeah, I mean, like I can't, so that is like slightly outside of my department. So like while I oversaw a lot of development stuff for our purposes that involves a lot of the like writing, game design, like I oversaw a lot of the digital stuff, but we have a whole, Fantasy Flight has a whole separate art department, and kind of visual creative directors, right? And so like they make a lot of those decisions, so I can't really speak to them exactly, but I can tell you that that kind of a new art style for Descent and for kind of Tyranoth in general, like was an intentional choice, right? It was something that like got concepted. It's that that kind of flatter style, a more muted art palette, not color palette, and that was kind of that was an intentional choice to kind of move the game forward and help set Tyranoth apart in the market. Like I know, people can wax poetic about a lot of the old Descent art, but I can think of quite a few hero pieces that like I don't
rose-colored glasses, people. Behind. I do not miss that at all.
There's some amazing art back there, but there's also some bad art, and like there's also some frankly, like, what's the right term? Not some of that art is not a great look, right. And like we wanted to move forward from some of that and like set kind of a bold new style that when people saw it, they knew it was Descent. And so that was some of the goal in it. Like I said, at the end of the day, a lot of that was on the creative team, and like I'm sure that they can, people from those teams can speak to it better than I can.
But it was discussed like over multiple levels. Like we're taking this in a new direction. Like we're going to make this look different. If we're going to carry the Descent brand forward, we can kind of mix up the brand a little bit with this new style. That was agreed upon across multiple.
It was. And that was like this is a big product, right? Like very few things happen like on accident.
Right.
Like while a global pandemic may have disrupted cost of things a bit, global pandemic did not disrupt like art. Well, it did actually disrupt art in a way, but it didn't disrupt art in this specific way. Right. a lot of this was kind of an intentional choice to move the game in a new visual direction.
Okay. Let's see, what are some of the other complaints about? What am I thinking of that people are complaining about more than anything?
Bring me on to air complaints. And And I don't even work for them. So like, poor Chris Gerber, head of studio, is going to watch this and be like, what is Fischer doing?
Well, I'm being facetious. It's the app. I've been warming you up. I've been warming up. So this is something that I know you speak directly to. And I'm sure that you have. I've seen like, the comments from, because you've been a part of the digital team for a while now, and FFG has, since Match the Madness. I think that was like 2016, 2017. So we're talking a little while of app integrated board game play. Lord of the Rings, Journeys to Middle Earth also had the same app. Descent now really just Road to Legend and the Star Wars Imperial Assault app. I mean, so many.
And technically, XCOM started it all off. It's a bit of a different beast, but XCOM was our first app integrated board game.
I could play that game without the app. I could. I think. Yeah, you could play that game out of a book. I mean, it was app integrated. Yes, I should take.
Well, you need a timer. You could maybe play it off a CD.
Yeah, you could play
like Space Alert.
Yeah, I think like in terms of because it's actually a big distinction for people because you've gotten to this point where it's like I cannot play this game without the app. Like I cannot. And there's that agita, right? But before I get to the agita, talk a little bit about like just the development of the app itself. I think there's so much that we don't understand about app development, how expensive it is, how it works, how transferable the apps are from different games. So it's like if you write the underlying code for one, does it transfer? We can kind of like reform things for different games, or you start it from scratch each time. Maybe talk a little bit about like just the guts of how we get these things in the first place.
Yeah, kind of the engine. So like we use Unity for development. The kind of app integrated game engines that started with Mansions of Madness. It was actually funny. I believe Road to Legend actually came out right before Mansions, but it was actually a derivation. Mansions was the creation of this engine, and then we adapted it to Descent while Mansions was printing and everything. And so Road to Legend actually came out a little first, but it was originally developed for that. So those code libraries, kind of, we call it this engine, but it's a layer on top of Unity. And that permutations of that basically made Road to Legend, made what's the Imperial Assault app called? Oh my god,
the Imperial Assault app. That's what it's called.
Rebel. Anyway, the Imperial Assault app, and then Journeys to Middle Earth, all kind of were permutations of that engine. Journeys to Middle Earth probably saw the largest change of it because it came. Mark Jones wrote a bunch of procedural generation stuff for all the maps, and so that saw the creation of this whole procedural engine on top of it. But it was creaking. It was creaking long before Journeys to Middle Earth, and Journeys to Middle Earth, like it was bursting at the seams, and so we kind of needed a redo, and so we did on Descent. So Descent uses it still uses Unity, but otherwise it's an entire kind of fresh retake on this, and that's Descent features an undo system for the first time in any of our apps.
One thing that people shouted out was like, thank goodness I can undo this stupid thing. I'd have to reset the whole adventure in order to play this game.
Our software engineers would be very glad to hear that, because
that has been a really well received feature, that undo feature.
So for reasons I don't want to bore people with, it was basically an impossibility in the old engine. But we are able to do it in the new one. And there are a lot of other quality of life improvements. Our backend was greatly improved. So a lot of the content is created by the tabletop developers through a visual scripting language, which for people who aren't familiar, it's a lot of like creating boxes and linking nodes. And so it's a lot less like physical scripting. Now, some of them did roll up their sleeves and do some scripting, but a lot of it is somebody who isn't that familiar with scripting can kind of like go in and create these things. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy. It's still like wildly complicated, but we had a whole new visual scripting plugin that enabled them to do a lot more powerful stuff, which came with benefits and trade-offs. So anyway, so
what are some of those trade-offs? That's interesting.
Descent was this brand new kind of code library for the app integrated engine and is way more powerful and clean as a result. And I think that'll show as Descent is supported over the coming years. I think you'll definitely see the strengths of this kind of new code base.
So what are some of the trade-offs that you were mentioning before?
Oh, so, well, I mean, with great power comes great responsibility, right? When, like when things are more restrictive, they're easier because there's fewer variables to screw around with. And so like, if I'm designing a level, and mansions had a lot of power, but our digital development department specifically cordoned off and stopped the developers from using a bunch of stuff. The developers being me at the time, I wrote a bunch of the mansion's original scenarios. And so you're working with a lot of very limited tools. And so you have to kind of get creative on how you do things. It means that like, oh, I don't have access to, these kinds of variables, or I can't alter them in this way. And there's all sorts of things that I might want to do from like programming experience that I can't actually do. But as a result, there's a lot fewer ways for me to hang myself, or for me to, just a lot fewer things for me to have to fill in, right? Like now, Descents is maximum power, right? Like the developers can do all sorts of custom things, which I think people will see as they play through these various quests. There's a lot of like different custom interactions that developers can create. But when you're a developer, now you have like all these different variables that you have to like make sure are all correct, fill in every time you create it, make sure they're all correct, and like all sorts of opportunities for bugs to crop up and stuff. So you have a lot more power, but you also have a lot more opportunity for stuff that needs to get QA'd out. And so as a result, it can make it allows us to create cooler things, but makes creating it a lot more labor intensive.
So we'll get to the creation of cooler things. That's the next one in a bit. But like this was a new thing, and so with new things, like Andrew Navarro spoke about this in the previous episode that we did together, like alluding to the cost. Like people just don't realize how expensive these things are. So then, like, how does that work in with the pricing? Is that one of those things where, I mean, it's almost impossible to like pay for it with one product, so to speak? Is that kind of what we're talking about here? Like it's possible, like you make it, but then you have it in mind that it has to be multiple games, or have to be subsidizing it from like other areas. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here?
Oh yeah. Like the cost of this kind of digital development. So like video games get away with it because of volume of sales. They sell way more copies than board games sell. Like even the best-selling board game, like doesn't hold a candle to like is that the phrase? It can't compare to like Fortnite, right? Obviously that's a big one, but like even if you look at like even indie studios on Steam and their numbers compared to board game numbers, they're not incredibly comparable.
A Steam game will be selling like 100,000 copies, and it's like, all right, that was okay. And then in board gaming, it's like, oh my god, 100,000 copies, that's amazing.
Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. And margins are wildly different between the two industries as well. So the end result is that digital development being sold like a board game is challenging, and there's a reason you haven't seen like more of it, right? There's a reason you don't see like Hearthstone level production values. I don't know. I pulled Hearthstone's a slightly outdated reference at this point, but you don't see those kind of production values that often in something that's directly associated with physical product that also has to sell. And so a place like Fantasy Flight will rely on like, the game line kind of slowly subsidizing all of the costs of this team. Because like, yes, they're still working on the game and still supporting the game, but there's a big upfront cost, right? They were working, I think we started on that Descent engine, the engine that would fuel Descent, like years ago, right? Like it was a long time that architecture was first being built.
Yeah. So it's a huge undertaking. And in terms of like, this isn't the same thing as Candy Crush, where it's like, we could sell it at $3. Like, I mean, there's a whole lot of money there, and it's across multiple products that this thing is going to get paid for. So just kind of helping people understand that.
And it adds a whole separate layer of QA too. That's one thing. Like board game testers, our board game testers do give us a lot of quality feedback on the app, right? That we use. But like software QA and like game QA are very different disciplines.
Right.
You can't expect somebody who's going to give great feedback on like competitive LCG balance to also be able to figure out weird software QA bugs about like hitting the same button 20 times in a row, right? Things like that. And so, we have to pay for all that QA. Like software development is like this whole other beast.
Okay. So I think that Sorry to hit you with the criticism, man, but it's a good way to kind of think through it. Hope you get it. So I think there's two main ones that come up. So the first one I actually felt, and I felt it more in Lord of the Rings Journeys than anything, and it's kind of my difficulty with the game overall. I definitely felt like I feel like there's a balance between how much am I paying attention to the app and how much am I paying attention to the board. Right. And for me, I felt like Lord of the Rings Journeys kind of drifted my attention a little bit further into the app. There was a lot that was tracked in the app. So like a lot of gamers will say, I just want my app to keep track of stuff and let me be free to like do that. But it's an art more than a science. Cause like, you say like, okay, tracking, well, now game stuff is floating in there. It's hard to tell kind of the difference. Right. So I guess like, do you think of it that way, or does the team think of it that way in terms of attention? Like how much do we want the players to pay attention to the app versus the board, and how did that play out in Descent?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that developers think about a lot. I think that we struck a balance we really liked back in Mansions of Madness, with the exception of like maybe the puzzles, which were kind of this holdover from first edition.
The puzzles, oh my god!
Oh, I'm pretty sure the interactive departments, the software developers would feel the same way. Though they were fun to work on. They're the whole separate, you had to design a whole separate mobile game that plays inside of Mansions.
I really do. Sorry, a total tangent, but let me get it off my chest. Like I would be like the low intelligence, like gun toting guy. And then I would get like an intelligence puzzle and I don't get like one move. Yeah. Why, people? Don't just want to give this off to the scientist. He's in the third room. He's not in the third room. He's sitting right next to me. You do it. Oh God. Sorry.
I mean, I like them as like a creative outlet for, that action point sync, but they, as far as like attention to the app goes in that conversation, they maybe weren't, but otherwise we liked the balance Mansion that struck a lot. Journeys had a bit more text that drew people into the app a little more. Descent definitely leans more app heavy. And to your point, it's an art more than a science. I think I talked a bit about this. I did a GDC talk on kind of a postmortem of Mansions of Madness for people who are curious. You have to put up with me umming and eyeing through the whole thing because I'm not much of a public speaker, but
doing great so far, my friend.
But I talk about it a bit there about striking that balance. It's at the end of the day, it is more of an art, and it is kind of personal preference, and it is up to the game, but it's very easy. The digital side can be very tempting because some of the strengths of the digital side are its ability to hide information from the players, which is really appealing for creating surprising narrative. And one of the other big strengths is hiding complexity, is the ability to do very kind of complex, interesting things that a board game couldn't do without being just burdensome. And so there's this temptation to kind of use it for a lot of those things. And so I think Descent cleaves more towards using the app than our past games have. But the trade-off there is it gets to do a lot more exciting things than our past game have. And there's a lot of like cool progression and stuff that is handled for you by the app. So is more approachable from like a learning standpoint, but also deeper. And so yeah, so it's definitely something the developers think a lot about. I think an interesting, a more micro example is the attack sequence. I think this was a victory for how we interact with the app. One of the things we try to do, that moment, how much of the game is in the app and how much is outside is a little less important than this thing in the talk I call interfacing, which is the time that you are inputting data into the app and the time the app is outputting data back to you. Those are the times that feel burdensome to people because you have somebody staring at a screen and everybody else is waiting for them. So we try to find ways to break the system into the two halves of the game in ways that reduce interfacing and make interfacing as seamless as possible. So things like the dialogue, the interfacing is pretty heavy there because somebody has to sit there and read it. So like in that place, the interfacing is a bit more aggressive and in your face. But on something like the attack, you can see a lot of complexity and interesting interactions on your board and how it interacts with the dice and allows you to like, change things around and do complex, cool things and have your little engine. But at the end of the day, what you're actually inputting to the app is very simple, right? It's an end result, just like basically a number slider and maybe a condition. And then the app does all sorts of complex things with the weapon part that you've equipped in the app and like is able to do all this interesting stuff. And then it outputs a simple result that tells you like how, what happens to the monster and maybe an instruction or two to do on the board. So there we have all this cool complexity on your board, all this cool complexity in the app, but your actual time spent with it is very simple. And so I think there is a really good example of a victory in like, and this is something that Nathan and Kara spent all sorts of time trying different versions of, like finding cool combat systems, but realizing that the interfacing is just too high and, iterating on. And they came to this one, which I think was a big success. And I think the places people feel the app more are when that interfacing is a bit more heavy. And like I said, like, I think, dialogue is one of those, and, spending time in town and in the crafting system can be another. And that's a trade-off that we choose to have benefits that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise.
So then, okay, so the dialogue and town stuff, that's not adventuring, right? And I don't think when people sit down and descend, most people, I think they're there to like, chuck dice and, have the exciting part with the monsters. I think so that you could think of it in terms of like time, like, okay, I'm spending the X amount of time here, I'm spending the Y amount of time here, that equals 100 or whatever. Or you can think about it in terms of like exciting moments, like how much of the excitement, the dice roll and the door opening and so do you feel like you've kind of had a good balance there? And do you feel like players are going to be excited in terms of like, okay, when the exciting moments are going to happen on the table, people, this isn't just an app type thing?
Yeah, I mean, like, admittedly, one of the most exciting moments in a very combat-focused game like this is the hit, right? Like, did I get him? And that does output out of the app. But like, I think at the end of the day, we do a lot of blind testing, we do a lot of observation of players. At the end of the day, I think the interfacing is minimal enough at that exciting moment to not be any different than somebody drawing a card. Right? Like it is, you're effectively drawing the card that is your phone screen. Your phone screen shows all the information you need to have. Other exciting moments, like we have some like big narratively exciting moments like cinematics and stuff. Those are more app focused. But like one of the things that the 3D terrain does for us is it brings kind of spectacle to the board. When you unfurl that new cool place, you build that new cool place in front of you. And so I think that, like I said, I think that the balance between tabletop and app is a little more heavy into the app. And, there are people out there who don't enjoy apps and games, and that's fine, right? That is like, there are a ton of other games that don't use apps that like, our goal is not to bring apps to every board game. Our goal is to like make this one unique experience. And it's not going to be for everybody, but it is for some people. And so we're excited to bring it to those people.
Yeah. Okay. So then that'll bring me to the second criticism, and I'm filtering out the useless ones. Like, I don't want apps in my board game. Like, come on, this isn't everybody. This is not everybody. Not every game. Exactly. Like, there's plenty of games without it. Plus, apps and board games are so expensive that like we were so afraid that like so many board games are going to have apps maybe in like the mid 2010s. And it's like, these are expensive. So like, no, we went in a different direction. But there is that idea of that eventually the app will no longer be supported and my game will no longer work. When I buy a board game, I want to be able to play with my children and my grandchildren. Very rarely do we, but that's what we want. Your board gamers, when we buy our box, we want to be able to at least conceptualize that we're going to have it forever and play it forever. And so there's this idea that like, okay, when they support, like, let's say I really love Descent second edition. Are they going to stop supporting Road to Legend? Is that going to be just like a thing that won't work on my device anymore? And now I have all this Descent 2E stuff, and then will that happen to my $175 game for Descent Legend of the Dark? So, does that get internalized? And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that is something that, has come up with all of our app integrated games. It came up very heavily with XCOM. I mean, one thing I talked about in the GDC talk is like Mansions, I think, faced some of the largest backlash coming from a first edition that was not app integrated. Like, I think Descent is probably approaching it, but like, I think Mansions still had more backlash before it released than even Descent did about this very subject, right? And like, here's the thing. Yeah, like, I'm not going to tell you that this app's going to be around forever. We all know it's not, right? Someday, this app will no longer be playable. It is in Fantasy Flight's best interest, and everybody there is invested in making these as playable as long as possible, right? There is a long tail of support. There's a whole team there who is, working to support all these games.
Mhm.
And so, they're going to try to keep these games playable as long as possible. And hopefully, someday, software rot and like preserving video games from software rot is like a whole genre of internet community.
Sure.
And I hope that these games get picked up by them someday, right? But like, yes, one day they won't be like, you won't be able to download the app for your game. And that's, but that is true of a lot of other products. That is true of a lot of other software. Like there are a lot of products that have like a limited lifespan. And like I can assure you that Fantasy Flight is dedicated to keeping these supported as long as possible, right? Like they want these to be playable for all eternity if possible. So they're going to have like a long life. But yes, one day they will not be playable.
I mean, I guess it goes into, and this is a little bit more of a sophisticated version of the critique of like a planned obsolescence type deal, where it's like, okay, I'm going to hook you into something, but this something has an expiration date, and we can monkey with that expiration date. So it's like, Apple gets in trouble with this a lot of like, new iPhones every year, new iOS every year. How much length do you really have with the battery? So like that thing's going to run out way sooner than you really wanted to. So you got to buy the new thing. So then you look at an app integrated game, and it can become a lever to kind of get people hooked into that planned obsolescence thing. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna play Descent, Legends of the Dark, I'm gonna play it for 5 years, and then oh my god, that they have 6 new products. This one no longer works. I'm gonna have to get pushed to the 6th new product. I know that's a little bit cynical, but like that's playing into what people are thinking when it comes to this like this new scary frontier of app integration. So no, it will not run out like in 6 months. But there's a larger thing, and these kind of things do happen in like other fields of text. It's like, it's not just like, well, we're going to support it as long as possible. There's this like planned aspect to it. I'm going to get pushed to another product and I'm going to spend more because I can no longer play the previous thing. So, I mean, I know you can't like speak to that whole thing, but just, I guess I almost wanted to just verbalize it and get some like musings.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I totally hear that, right? Like in a world where, like, what device was it the other day? I was using some device, and you kind of have this suspicion, like, did they plan this and have to buy a new one?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I feel that. I mean, like the best I can do is assure you that, like, I'm not with FFG anymore, so like I could just blow them up if I wanted to. But the fact that is that nobody there is interested in that.
And like, I think that's what people want to know. Like at the end of the day, you can tell us that, the intention is that there's a team there that is hearing people and cares about that and will work to give this thing as long a life as humanly possible.
Oh yeah. Like there is a portion of the interactive team just dedicated to support on our games. Like I don't know when exactly the last patch was, but like we are still actively supporting Road to Legend, right? Like the Descent Second app, like, and ongoing, they are continuing to support the Descent Second app and have interest in keeping it alive as long as physically possible. Like if planned apps, if this fear were like, this would be a perfect time to kill Road to Legend to send people to Legend of the Dark, but that's not what they want to do, right? Like people, like Descent Second is an awesome game. There's a ton of awesome product for it, right? Just a ludicrous amount of product for it, right? Like, and we want people to keep playing that. We want people to keep loving Descent Second Edition.
Sure.
It is not dead, and like they are going to like it's funny because this is, you're gonna get my slight rant here, but like people, like these same people who are worried about like the obsolescence of this game or it dying, as soon as a new edition of a game is announced, they declare that the old edition is dead.
No, I'm throwing away my second edition now. I might as well just throw it all away. Yeah. It's all garbage.
Second edition is dead. Right. No, second edition is still a great game. I have shelves of it. I have every single Second Ed product back in my basement. And like, Road to Legend is still a great game. And it is still there. And like, it is the goal of Fantasy Flight to keep it there as long as they possibly can. So I can guarantee you that there is no planned obsolescence in any of this. The goal, like, these are all creative people who are just like want to make something unique and interesting. And like oftentimes unique things are going to have some things in the cons column. They're not going to be perfect for everybody, but I think they're going to bring something new. And I do think that FFG has accomplished something with this app integrated game line with that.
All right. So actually, I know you've been wanting to talk about this one too, because you did the thread about this, and this links with the app stuff, and it is the scenario design, right? And the approach to scenario design. So and this was off of Efka from No Pun Included. Love following his Twitter, where he was ranting about quantity and quality. Right. So, the idea being like, okay, he doesn't want to be called a content creator because content is about quantity. Quantity is about stuff, just stuff. And I did an interview on my own show with the Space Div talking about stuff. I can't stand the term content creator either because of that sense of like, I'm just putting out stuff versus quality. So, quality, whatever that is, it's such a weird thing to define, but like, the idea that it matters what I do and how cool is it and how interactive is it, how much value does it bring to the person, that matters as opposed to just the stuff. So then in that context, you responded, and it's like you compared, Gloomhaven scenarios 96 versus Descent, I think it was 16,
somewhere 16 or 18, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
16,
In the teens.
I think 16. I think it's 16.
Somewhere around there.
I should have this up.
Right? High teens. That's people, and that became one of the points of criticism, where it's like, well, we're getting all these scenarios in this other game and we're not getting nearly as many scenarios in this game. What are we paying for? So then you came in and like, okay, well, that's a content quantity mindset, and you kind of went from there. So maybe you could talk a little bit about elaborate that critique a little bit for our audience.
Yeah, so absolutely, right? And like, it's so hard because some of these words have like all these different definitions, right? Like when we say quantity over quality, right? Like it's not implying that one is better than the other, but right. Like, so Gloomhaven has, like Gloomhaven is a comparison, and actually like, it is on our minds when we're making a game like this, along with a bunch of other dungeon crawlers on the market. And like, we did compare the numbers and we looked at the numbers, right? But the numbers are only one metric. And that was kind of the point of my Twitter thread, is that like, yes, you can just compare the numbers 96 or whatever to like 16, right? Oh, 96 is better than 16.
Right.
Except they're so different. So, and that was kind of part of my point, is that like Gloomhaven's great. I love Gloomhaven. I've played a ton.
All right, Isaac, I hope you're watching this one.
yeah, I love the game. I'm excitedly waiting Frosthaven, my copy of Frosthaven, to arrive. But like, its scenarios are like, their strength is in being procedural combat arenas, right? Like they are spaces, and a lot of there are spaces with monsters in them. A lot of them, the interest comes from different monster mechanics and how those different monster mechanics combine, and how you are figuring out this optimization puzzle with how you spend your turn. It's a great game.
And the environment, so like the spatial aspect to it. So if I put
and
pit
like,
fiend in a hallway, and if I put the pit fiend in an arena, and if I put the pit fiend with a thing in front of it, those are three different scenarios. I haven't really done like anything.
How are these tiles shuffled around, right? But it's this different spatial puzzle. And so because of this, you can create 96 because they're all kind of created from these same kind of building blocks to just rearrange the puzzle. Descent's quests, on the other hand, are these hand-authored experiences where you effectively have like Amuda or Kara or Brandon or Nathan there with you, GMing a game for you, an RPG for you. You get hand-authored story, you get branching choices, you get custom designed mechanics and like objectives. Right, like Gloomhaven, most of the objectives are fairly straightforward, and some of the ones that have like a more complicated objective are often horribly broken by certain characters turning invisible and going across the map. It does really well at the combat arena, but struggles sometimes on other things. So Descent does really well at telling this story and at creating this. Every moment is kind of unique and feels like somebody is game mastering you. And so it is a very different experience and a lot more labor intensive experience.
Sure.
So like, and part of my point in the Twitter thread is like, we could have made the choice when we were making Descent to make systems that enabled us to quickly make lots of different variants and have, like, we could have made hundreds of quests for Descent if we wanted. But Descent would have had to be a very different game with systems that enabled that kind of just fast procedural creation of lots of different combat arenas or whatever we made. and it would be a very different game than it is, and it would be a game that's a lot closer to Gloomhaven. And here, and like, getting back to talking about making unique things, we already have Gloomhaven. It's already great. We're about to have Frosthaven, which I hope is going to be even better.
Yeah.
And and so we don't need Descent to be Gloomhaven. We need Descent to be this other thing. And so this other thing has, a lot fewer quests, but every quest is offering these really unique experiences. And so like measuring it just by number is a little isn't kind of showing that. And I think that games that offer a ton of content are great in their own regard, but we shouldn't measure every game that comes out by the amount of content it creates, because then we're just going to create one type of game. The type of game, you see a lot of on Kickstarter, right? Tons of content. And we're going to miss out on these other experiences. Twilight Struggle would not have, doesn't stack up great on amount of content, number of different varieties of scenarios or anything, but it is an amazing game. And so that was kind of the point of my Twitter thread. And so I think when you take a look at Descent's 16 quests, it seems like a smaller amount, but the differences are in the moments and the types of moments you get, and in the variance on replaying and choices and branching. And it is going to be continued to supported, and there's going to be lots of new content that builds and uses the stuff you get in your core set. And so I don't think comparing that direct number is actually that good of a comparison at the end of the day.
I mean, I think what you said, which really got me excited, was because I'm an old D&D head. That's how I really got into game. So so many games, the adventure games, promise a D&D experience on the board, right? And what we end up getting is something closer to Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is very good because it leaned in the hardest. It didn't bother saying that you're going to get this D&D experience on the board. You're going to get 96 spatial puzzles, and you're going to have fun moving through spatial puzzles because you're going to get cool characters and all kind of stuff. We're not, it's not promising, D&D on a board and giving me something else. Descent is really trying to give me that. Really trying to have that app feel like a dungeon master. So I'm cool with that, and I've not played it, and I can't wait for that. So I think in terms of the replayability, I think that becomes a word that's thrown around a lot. Replayability. I'm not going to go back and Descent and play 1 through 96 again, or go through those branches. Will I want to play Descent those 16 scenarios again with different characters, and will I get different experiences, or is it or is it still a once through? And getting I'm just gonna really enjoy those 16 scenarios.
I mean, I think it depends on the player. Some players are the once through type players, right? Honestly, I'm kind of a once through type player. I play something with a wild amount of variance. I still only play it once. I never replayed Mass Effect. I just played my one playthrough. I have my one Shepherd, and that's my Shepherd, right?
I have Paragon and Renegade Shepherd. I wasn't going to lose out on that.
Oh, Renegade's so mean, though. I couldn't be Renegade. Renegade Shepherd's an
Renegade Shepherd. Well, actually, a total sidebar, but I really want to complain about this. Renegade Shepherd, the way they designed that stupid game, and maybe they fixed it with the remake, but Renegade Shepherd, the choice was always to kill somebody. Do you set them free, you kill them, and then by the time you got to the end, Mass Effect of 3, resolving the thing, everyone's dead. So you didn't have any choices anymore.
You have no characters.
I have no characters left. There's nothing there. I'm doing my Paragon run. It's everybody's there, and I'm resolving all these storylines. And this one, they forgot to replace the characters with other ones. Sorry. No, but I mean, that's my type of game, right? That's my type of game.
So some people might not want to replay, but I think others will. And there is some variance in how each of these play out. There's a virtue system. The virtue system for each character it is a bit Paragon Renegade, but a bit more nuanced than that, where it's kind of these two different identities, right, for every character, and how the different characters swing in their virtues changes the outcome of their story and how their story interacts with other stories. To that content comparison thing, number of characters, Descent obviously only has 6 compared to Descent seconds. I don't know how many we had in the end. This is again stats I
don't even compare to the end.
It's lots.
Yeah.
It's lots.
Mm-hmm.
But we only have 6, but they are each one is the complexity of a whole class from Descent. and so like you can build them in all these different innumerable ways, and then they have these a lot more kind of hand authored stories specific to them that are going to carry across the game and have these branching narratives. And so like some people are going to want to see the other side of that character they love. Some players are going to want to see a character that they didn't even play through. They just took Cyrus on his like the couple quests that require him to be there and never used him again. And this time they really want to see everything that has to do with him. And so like, I think there's meat on the bones for people who want to replay.
Mm-hmm. And the last part, okay, I want to keep you too long, but I think we've hit most of the things, is the characters. You seem to be really excited about the way that the characters develop. That is not something Descent is known for. Descent is known for hold me back, don't hold me back, just give me the dice and let me hit some monsters. And the characters are almost like violence delivery systems. They weren't actually like things I was interested in. But Descent, Legends of the Dark seems to really invest in the characters. Was that something that came in early on? Was that something like, okay, and in terms of the type of experience I want, was like, this is something I really want from the very beginning, or did it kind of emerge along the way?
Oh yeah, no, that came from very early. I think it was in Nathan's original vision that we sat down and like visioned the game. And that's an early process where we're kind of figuring out what the game is and getting it approved by everybody, and like figuring out what we want it to look like. Focusing on characters was something we wanted to do here, specifically for storytelling initially, but it enabled us to do some really cool things design wise too, from like a very mechanical standpoint. Like I said, each character is about the complexity of like a class. Honestly, probably even more than a class from Descent Second Edition. They have a bunch of cards, and they have access to this whole unlockable bevy of cards. And like in Second Ed, you grew your board, and by the end of Second Ed, your board is this wild engine of a bunch of mini cards, and you're trying to remember all your triggers and stuff. This has a lot, this cleanlier system that kind of has slots, and you kind of choose from your big array of cards each mission on which ones you want to slot in. But then you have all this complexity on like which side, and like flipping them and preparing them and like managing your tokens on them. And then each character was specifically designed. Kara did a bunch of the character designs, and like she's really good at this kind of mechanic, making these mechanics where each one feels really different. And so each one has kind of their shtick and their own feel, and like their I think the game really succeeds in how the different characters play and how the different characters feel.
I almost wish that the marketing would have led with them, so that would have told me this was a different game. Or that would have told me that this was you could do that. Like you can, have a character feature, and, you do your app, whatever animations, and they can like doing their thing. If they're a ranger, they're shooting their bow, doing one thing, and, introduce that character. I almost wish that was foregrounded a lot more, because I didn't know until I really looked into the game that this was so much more character driven, so much more RPG inspired than Descent, which is the Descent Second Edition, which feels more like a Diablo, like just fat loots and run. So I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know if that's something that, on reflection, it's like, okay, maybe we should have kind of gone in that direction more in terms of sharing the information about the game.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's probably for the marketing director to decide at the end of the day. But, to our earlier conversation, I think, some of it just comes from like previous expectations. It's building on the legacy of this game line that's been around for a long time, and so there's certain expectations. So anything that bucks those expectations,
good point.
It will be a surprise. And maybe we should have been more upfront with it, but who can say?
No, that's a good point, because like, I mean, you showing these characters, then you'll have the people that are loyal to the Descent going, what am I doing here? they'll build a about anything, but like, that would have been an extra thing that people can't. No, I think I just think of it from my perspective. Like, I just want characters. I love story and everything. So no, that's great. Is there anything else in terms of the high level of this? And I think we covered a lot of ground, but was there something that kind of stood out that you want to kind of get the word out of, like, this was cool, pay attention to this type thing for Descent?
I think we covered a lot.
Yes.
I didn't really have like I didn't have like a list of goals or anything.
I love when a guest says that. It's like, yeah, you did that. We hit most of the points. That's awesome.
I think I hit on like, I think I think there's a lot of legitimate concerns from different avenues out there, and like I kind of said, it's a different take, right? It's trying to do something a little bit unique, and not just in like the content we're presenting and the type of game we're presenting, but also in how we're presenting it. And so like, like I understand that, the price point is a big sticking point for people. And I totally like hear that, right? Like this isn't as financially accessible a game as other games. And that sucks. But across the game line, Fantasy Flight is known for supporting game lines in a very big way. And like across the Descent Second Ed line, you look at all those different products and all those different like blisters and everything else. It really adds up. The burden really adds up across this larger game line, and the burden on stores to like carry everything. And like you go to your local store and want this specific Descent Second Ed expansion, they don't have it, so you go to Amazon. They just lost out on a sale. Legends of the Dark is going to have expansions, but they're going to be bigger, they're going to be splashier, and they're going to condense a lot more content into and like materials into these singular boxes that are easier for stores to carry, and means that you have to make fewer purchases. And so at the end of the day, like I won't deny that the initial buy-in is pretty high, but like I think across the game line, people will find that like it's easily comparable to any other like Fantasy Flight game line in kind of like keeping up with this ongoing support. So I do kind of like just want to put that perspective out there. That is not to deny the people who have like that concern about that initial buy-in, because it is high, but it is a consolation, at least.
At the very least, it makes me feel better, and I hope it makes a lot of audience members feel better that A, you say that that's a very important note, but B, there was like many different points of decision that, in terms of the app being, so costly, and you're trying something with the app, you're trying something unique. This is not like a thing where it's like apps just taking over everything. Like, there was a lot of craft put into this app, and like, making it, and if you don't like it, you don't like it, but like it's an artistic vision into such a big money grab. The scenario design about like the point about accessibility, like, the pop of it is inviting in its own way, just to kind of go back to that conversation. I mean, and so many different other things that have said, we tried our best here. I have my feelings about, does that upper tier need to be serviced so much? That's my point. But like, I mean, I have my point. Like everybody else is from a different perspective, and they're looking at different things. And at the end of the day, like Fantasy Flight is doing Fantasy Flight. This is not taking anybody by surprise. And I love the point you made before. Like they've been doing this for a long time. So it's not like we can like they can't change now. It's like they're going to all of a sudden be a different company. This is just in keeping with what we've been getting from them for years and years.
And I can't speak to all sorts of things coming from the company in specific, but I can tell you that like the digital department, the interactive department, does have cool projects in the future, but they're not coming for all your board games. Fantasy Flight has tons of not app integrated board games. They're, like this is not like this slow takeover or anything. There's lots of traditional board games that will be good till the end of time coming, all sorts of exciting ones, and like ones, like board games at, like more accessible price points and all sorts of stuff. So, it is not like a herald. I know I've seen, some people like, oh, this heralds, what's app integrated next, right? Like,
right.
It is not coming for all your board games.
App integrated Pandemic, app integrated Ticket to Ride, app integrated Wingspan.
Well, I can't speak for Z-Man, but at least at FFG.
Right. Okay, so I mean, it's funny because it's like you're no longer at FFG, so I kind of like dredged up a bunch of FFG stuff for a little while.
Yeah,
but we're close. I mean, it's still your baby. You spent a lot of time on it, so that's very cool. But we're closing the door on the chapter of your design life in terms of Fantasy Flight, and other things are coming. Is it full steam ahead on Earthborn Rangers at this point, or do you have like other stuff hopping in the piper too?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, we just came off a successful Kickstarter, so I am barreling ahead with Earthborn Rangers, but I'll have lots of different projects in the future. You know how the industry is. There's a lot of NDAs and stuff, so you can't talk about a lot of stuff, but we just came off Kickstarter, so Earthborn Rangers, for people who haven't heard of it, you can check it out. Will be coming out next year, and that's all my attention at the moment.
local production has been achieved, at least in North America. We're looking at it in EU and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
definitely
Excited
those
about it.
goals have been met. So that's really cool. Andrew Fischer, thank you so much for the time, the knowledge, the depth. You're very thorough. I know self-effacing when it comes to the public speaking, but you did a great job. I can speak from a lot of my my audience. Enjoyed, the design insights that you gave. Enjoyed your updates. You're very thorough, very clear in terms of like explaining stuff with our Power Rangers, and here, amazing job. So thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's fun to talk.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, bye, everybody.